Hello, welcome everyone to today's stream. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. You can watch all my videos, podcast streams on YouTube, and then you can see the replays on all the podcast providers, Spotify, Apple, all that. Also, the author of Third Apron, the new salary cap newsletter on Substack. And today, I want to talk about the Sixers. I think I have probably the most questions about this team out of just about any of the ones that are set to be eliminated from the playoffs. And joining me today is one of the best guys covering the Sixers. You could find his work on PhillyVoice.com. Sixers beat writer Adam Aaronson. Adam, the Sixers do not play today. How are you feeling this morning?
Relieved. Thank you for having me on, and I should say you get more questions about the Sixers than anyone. A lot of those probably come from me, where I'm just constantly texting you, asking to double check my math and salary cap understanding. And so thank you for all the work that you do to help me out.
I would think I might get the most questions from Sixers fans in general, because it's either something good like last year, you're excited, you got some cap space, what can they do with it? Can they do all this stuff? And then now it's like, well, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen with Embiid's contract? How can we keep Quentin Grimes? Lots of different questions now, just all over the place. So I appreciate the support from the Sixers fan base. And yeah, no, we've been in touch for a couple of years now, and I'm always glad to help with the salary cap stuff. So just a kind of quick summary on what the Sixers did. I want to just talk about just a quick summary of what they did, their moves they did, how they got up to this point. So I'm just looking at their summary of moves. So they operated the 23-24 season as like, it was kind of a pseudo gap year. They were competitive, but they were preparing to have cap space. So eventually they had $60 million to work with, and they got one of the best available free agents considered at that time, probably still the best free agent available last year's market in Paul George, gave him a 4-year max, $211 million. They also used the remainder of the space to sign Caleb Martin, 4 for 35, Andre Drummond, 2 for 10. Also managed to get Kelly Oubre back, 2 for 17, 1+1 on the room mid-level. And they were able to do all this while re-signing Tyrese Maxey, and arguably got the steal of the draft in Jared McCain. So without considering what happened this season, did you like the direction and the process of what they did last summer, particularly in regard to free agency? Do you think it was like, would you do it again or change anything else about some of the bigger picture stuff they did?
Generally speaking, I was supportive of it. I still certainly understand it. I probably had more worries about certain aspects of it than others, but not enough that swayed me to the point of thinking they shouldn't do it. Like, for example, I think you were more worried about investing in Paul George long term than I was. And I would have done it, but I did have some second thoughts and some, just questions about how he will age and how he fits into all of this. Even going back to last year's trade deadline, and really you have to go before that to the James Harden trade to the Clippers, which was done with the motivation of getting these expirings and picks to set up this cap space run. When you kickstart that process, like you said, not that they were not a good team last year, but it was sort of a gap year in terms of being genuine championship contenders. And when Joel Embiid is going on 30 years old with his injury history, you just never know when it's going to be your last year of him being one of the best players in the league. Now we know that last year might have been that. That's certainly where it's trending right now. And so I think it was fair at the time to call some of that into question, and I did. But at the same time, Paul George is a 9-time All-Star who has one of the more portable skill sets of any sort of star player of this era. You look at the other moves. Caleb Martin didn't play particularly well here, battled through a lot of injury stuff, hasn't played that well in Dallas, but a 4-year deal, cost effective, like it was never going to hamstring them that money. Obviously, the Dallas Mavericks thought that he was a valuable asset on that contract, even after a rough first few months of the season. So It's just ironic to me because they've had so many off seasons that people were really upset about that ended up going well. Uh, and so it's of course it's this one where everyone's writing their stories about how the Sixers are the winners of the offseason on July 1st and July 2nd, that it completely blows up in flames. Um, but I understood what the idea was. Um, I don't know what the best alternative would have been if they went another route. Um, I think a lot of people here like the idea of Embiid and Maxey, and then as many good role players as you can find, and I think that's nice in theory. I also we have a clear sample size with this front office and with Daryl Morey over 20 plus years that he values star caliber talent and will chase it at all costs. So I don't think that was ever really a realistic sort of construct for them. So again, I understand what they were going for. I just clearly it missed the mark in a lot of ways, and it doesn't mean they're completely doomed. That largely hinges on Embiid and his left knee, and time will tell on that.
So to the first point you brought up about, yeah, I've had my videos last summer talked a good amount about what the Sixers can do, their possibilities, summarizing their moves after the fact. And overall, I think that this was the process of having cap space, what they did leading up to it. I think that was like the correct plan, without a doubt, because the alternative was probably extending Harden on something long term. Not that, it was going to necessarily be a bad deal or anything, but I think as far as raising their ceiling to be something beyond the second round exit, I think they needed to make a change there with that salary slot, and with Maxey's ascension, they didn't really need Harden going forward. So trading him, getting a couple first round picks for him. And really the thing that made this all possible was that Tyrese Maxey didn't extend. They were able to re-sign him in free agency. So they made all those moves while keeping his low cap hold. They were able to do all that. So as far as having cap space, I think that made sense because they did need to do some sort of a soft reset on their core. I've said in the videos, like as it happened or like in the lead up to it, that I probably wouldn't go after Paul George if it takes a 4-year max, which was what it took. But I do think just having that flexibility so they can do some other stuff made sense. Like, for example, not that I think this would have been like a significantly better move or anything. I don't think it would have been, but like Brandon Ingram was one of the top guys available and it finally got traded. What if instead of using their cap space to max out Paul George, they traded for like a sub all-star level guy like an Ingram who's cheaper? You have a little more flexibility. Maybe, I would assume that those Clippers picks may have been enough for that type of move. But then I would say maybe they could have done some trades for other players that fit. They could have had a slightly deeper roster and a little bit of more manageable cap sheet going forward, which we'll get into because now they're going to have a lot of challenges with these 3 max guys, and they already have a lot of other obligations that's going to make upgrading this core a little difficult. So, I just think they, as far as doing this cap space thing, like it was definitely necessary. Could they have done things a little bit differently? Possibly, but I understand going after Paul George. Like, I'm not gonna say that like it's gonna be like such a horrible move or anything like that. Like he's probably not gonna give you $55 million of value going forward, and he will be better than this year, like for sure. Like this was like I think this was like a remarkably down season from him. But yeah, like to your point, a lot of it then just stems from what are you going to get to him? What are you going to get from Embiid going forward? What will you get? Will you get anything from Embiid going forward? That's the other part of the summary. I just completely blanked out. I completely missed that. Yeah, they also gave him a 3-year extension.
Yeah, 3 years, 193 million kicks in after next season. So Embiid, I believe it's 4 years and 248 million after this season.
Let's see. Okay, I think we're back. Just give me a sec. Okay. Yeah, I think I got everything back on. All right, everyone. Sorry about that. I had a little bit of technical issues before we got started. Looks like I am back. I'm just confirming everything. If anyone in the chat just wants to make sure, otherwise I'm just going to check the stream real quickly. Okay, so yeah, we were just about to transition about to Embiid. And my next question has to do with him anyway. So we were just kind of summarizing the moves last year. I was saying I like the process overall. I like the process of having cap space, even if some of the moves retroactively don't look too good. But for the most part, yeah, we're about to just transition to the Embiid factor because that's essentially what this all comes down to. And there's a lot of speculation. We still haven't even gotten the. Hold on, let me just make sure. Actually, I just remember I got to make sure your audio's on. Okay, you're good. Yeah. So I remember, though, there's been a lot of speculation about what he might end up doing for the treatment going forward. There were some like sports doctors saying, what if he does something like a meniscus repair or replacement, something like that? And it's been like a little over 2 weeks now since his it was announced that he's going to get shut down for the season, and we still don't have any we still don't know what it exactly is going to do, which could dictate how long he'll be out, if he'll even return next year. What do you think is going to happen to him? Will he be back next year? And if so, what kind of level do you expect from him going forward?
Yeah, it's hard to say because as you just pointed out, we still don't know. We still don't know what treatment option he's going to be taking. We don't know what the treatment options are that are on the table right now. Some of those could be a minor where he's playing in October, I'm sure. Some of them could be significant where he misses most or all of next season. I have no idea. And I don't think anybody really does other than the team and its medical staff and Joel himself, what options are actually on the table and what they're taking seriously. But as far as like how they plan for him, they can't operate as if they're going to get one of the four best players in the world back. That's what he was 14 months ago. He was the favorite to win his second straight MVP in January of last year. But then the meniscus happens, and it might have just been the straw that broke the camel's back with his left knee. They can't bank on a superstar level production from him because that's not what they got this year. It was there in glimpses, but he was more like a sort of fringe all-star in terms of his actual impact, which is a testament to his skill because he really couldn't move. But by about this time last month, it was just so blatantly obvious that he could not move at a speed necessary to compete at the NBA level, and that's why they had to shut him down. So that's, again, this is sort of the issue, is that you have to construct a version of the team that is competitive with Embiid, which you would ideally want to be able to contend. And you also have to be planning an entire sort of team and team play style for when he's unavailable. That's a real challenge. It's particularly challenging within the confines of a salary cap. So whether they can pull that off, I don't know, particularly because his salary is already so significant. And then you add on the George money that's almost the same, and then another max deal with Maxey. It's just so many roster construction challenges that come with paying so much money to someone who is not necessarily reliable to play.
Yeah, still got about 4 more years now beyond this one after his extension. And I'm trying to think of like what kind of guy he might be going forward. I've never been the biggest Embiid guy, or I feel like out of the elite players, whatever that top 6 or 7 guys have been over the past few years, that he's kind of on the lower end of that. But extremely intelligent player, very high IQ, and always, as his athleticism has waned over the years, he just played a lot smarter. And I could see some version of him where he is able to leverage that and remain effective. Maybe not quite at the level of what his contract expects him to be, but like one player I have in mind where who's aged like tremendously is Brook Lopez, where he's just like he does. Sometimes I worry, like the way he moves worries me, but he's just managed to like despite how slow he is, he was an elite rim protector very late into his career, shoots the ball really well, just keeps the offense going. Not exactly what you would want from Embiid making north of $60 million a year in the next few years, but I'm just kind of trying to like have some kind of optimistic idea of like what could be the best worst case scenario, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's something that has been suggested here often is the idea that if you scale back his offensive workload, that it might be just as impactful as playing fewer games and playing fewer minutes per game. And frankly, that was part of the appeal of adding a second Max co-star in Paul George alongside Maxey, is that the Sixers felt like they were no longer going to be entirely relying on Embiid to outscore their opponents. And this is the first year of Embiid's career where they've been better without him on the floor than they have been with him. I mean, I'm sure everybody remembers, if any Sixers fans are listening, they know this all too well. The numbers, the on-off stuff with Embiid, it was comical. The degree to which they would just obliterate teams whenever he was on the floor, no matter how he was playing, and then just get absolutely destroyed whenever he was on the bench. That game 7 in Toronto with the Kawhi Leonard buzzer beater, Embiid played 45 and a half minutes and was a plus 10, and they lost in regulation. That's the sort of stuff that they've been dealing with for basically his entire playing career. And now they hope that they had the formula to survive minutes without him consistently with the help of Maxey and George. And they might have been right, but they now no longer have the main piece, which is Embiid in there to dominate the bulk of the minutes where he is in the game. So again, it's just, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it just keeps coming back to the idea of trying to build a team in a salary cap league around someone who's consistently unavailable and makes a massive percentage of the salary cap. It's just hard to envision that going well.
Yeah. So, and I think this is a good way to transition to what the team construction can be going forward, because this big three, having two 35% max guys in Embiid and George, who did not look like that level of guys this year. And then Maxey's, whose deal is actually looking pretty good, 25% of the salary cap. But then they've got a lot of other players already under contract. They're already pretty hamstrung, and that's before we even get into bringing back their top free agents. So I'm just looking at their cap sheet right now. Just give a quick summary. You all can see this on capsheets.com. See the Sixers payroll projection that I have so far for next season. And as of now, I've got them with 13 players under contract, and this includes them keeping their first round pick. I think we're at a point where it's now, when I'm projecting, I'm gonna have them include the pick. ESPN BPI expects them to finish with the 5th worst record, and I kind of agree that that's probably where they finish at the end of the year. Their schedule is one of the easier ones going forward, but what they've been putting out has just been like some of the worst lineups in the league right now. So I think they're gonna I feel like it's a safe possibility they finish with the 5th worst record, which is pretty big. This is something that you and I have discussed, where keeping the fifth worst record is meaningfully more important than having the sixth worst record. Because if you're sixth, you could only move up to the top four. Where if you're fifth, you can move up to the top four, but also have a little flexibility to drop down to six. Remember, that pick is top six protected this year. So they have a much stronger, much higher probability of keeping their selection if they have the fifth overall pick. But as I'm looking at it, they have their three max guys. If they keep their pick, that's a $9 million salary. And then they have Oubre, Drummond, Eric Gordon. They all have player options above the minimum. I would feel pretty good that Drummond and Gordon pick their options up. As for Oubre, I think that's still pretty up in the air. And then they've got a lot of other guards, younger guys on team options like Lonnie Walker, Jared Butler, Ricky Council has a non-guarantee, Justin Edwards has a team option. So if all these players stay and they keep their pick, they're going to be right at the luxury tax line already. And over the past few years, the Sixers would start over the luxury tax and make some moves to get below it. And just given how bad this season went, and I would imagine this kind of lowers expectations for what the high-end version of this team would be when healthy. I doubt they'll want to be in the tax again next year unless they're just blowing teams out of the water and looking like they could get past the second round. But as you can see, though, like they already have a full roster, and if they keep their pick, they're going to be right at the tax. And that's before bringing in, potentially re-signing their top guy. So knowing this is like the big challenge now heading into next season. So again, assuming they keep their pick, they're right at the tax. It's going to be tricky keeping Quentin Grimes. He's a restricted free agent. They'd be able to match any offer for him that he gets from other teams. And then Gershon Yabusele, who's a minimum, they're going to have to use a portion of their mid-level most likely to bring him back. Knowing just how hamstrung they are already going into the offseason, where would you start in terms of who the Sixers could look to move to create the flexibility to bring back Quentin Grimes and Gershon Yabusele?
Yeah, so if you're talking about ways to shed money that's already on their books, the only thing I really see other than guys with player options would be if there's a team that would take on the last 3 years of Paul George. And if you can trade him for some combination of expiring veterans and guys on multi-year deals that it might be kind of bad money, but not terrible. And it, makes your cap sheet a little bit cleaner and the other team gets the best player. Could be something like that. I definitely agree with you that Drummond at $5 million, I would expect him to pick that up. I also wouldn't be surprised if they immediately look to shed that money, especially, a Dembona, who's a rookie, who's got a partial guarantee for next year at just under $2 million salary. They like him a lot. He's shown some real signs of promise. If shedding Drummond helps you bring back Yabusele, and you have Yabusele and Bona in your backup center rotation, I think they'd be pleased with that. I think at that point, they wouldn't feel like they needed Drummond at that number. How much it costs to get off of him, I don't know. He's a playable center largely, and it's not like $5 million is $50 million. At the same time, it cost the Nuggets 3 second-round picks to get rid of Reggie Jackson at a similar number this past year. So I don't know exactly how much it would cost, but I think he's the main one to look at. Gordon is interesting to me because I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think if he declines that player option and then re-signs for the minimum, he would make like $250,000 more, but his cap hit would go down by like $1.2 million because it's a 1-year minimum. And that's like a quick thing they could do to save some money. But the pick is really an unexpected sort of wrinkle in all of this. Because that's, again, we're not just talking a first round pick, we're talking a high lottery pick, and the rookie scale is not exactly small these days. Right now you have it at just over 9 million, could be anywhere between 7 and like 11 if they got the number 1 pick. And that throws a wrench in things because every dollar is important, and they have ducked the tax in recent years, as you mentioned. And there's an optimistic way to look at that and a pessimistic way to look at that. The optimistic way is that they have an increased appetite to pay the tax moving forward because they've ducked it the last few years. The pessimistic view would be if they weren't willing to go into the tax for those teams, why would they be willing to do it for this one? So with every Quentin Grimes 25-point game, the theoretical price could go up, and his market is not good. I think plays well to the Sixers' hands, but it's still something that they have to be cognizant of.
So to your Eric Gordon question, yeah, I looked into it. Technically, yeah, he would make a little more money by declining it or resigning because the salary cap barely went up. So his player option amount for next year, just a small 5% raise. This year's salary cap rise going up 10% would like vastly out. It's like 200,000 more. So yeah, that actually does make him opting out a viable option that could help the Sixers out. And as in regards to, I guess I'll start with the Paul George part because yeah, I would guess that if they had a choice in this, they would probably trade Paul George and try to gain a lot of flexibility there. I just struggle to find what the market is for him, if there's any teams actually interested. The one deal that I could maybe kind of see is maybe if the Suns, if Bradley Beal would be willing to waive his no trade clause to go to the Sixers. He has 1 year less than Paul George, so it's something where you're not really saving that much money in the short run if you're the Sixers. You're just able to get off this obligation a little faster. I don't like that trade for either team, but that's like the only thing where I could kind of think of where a Paul George destination might be. And then, so I'm gonna assume that they'll probably hold on to him. I don't know if, especially now given their situation, if they have to give up assets to get him, I don't feel good about trading any future draft picks just to save some money. They already traded a first to get off Horford a couple of years ago, and this is the first that they're now fighting to keep. So I think more realistically though, we can look at the player option guys for ways for them to save money. So like I said, if they keep the fifth, I should clarify, if they keep the 5th overall selection, that's a $9 million salary. Let's say Oubre opts out, which I think it could be a reasonable possibility, especially with the ascension of Quentin Grimes. I'm sure that he is the top 2 guard the Sixers have right now. They have among the many other ones that they have on minimum salaries. I could see Oubre opting out, one, because he has played really well. There could be a good market for him. Maybe he could get a little more than what his player option amount is. But also his role might not be so defined next year with, we don't know what kind of, if the Sixers will even like compete next year, but also there's a lot of other players of his position there. So let's say he hops out. Now you're a little more able to keep Quentin Grimes. Now, I know despite these ridiculous stats he's been doing, I think a lot of people kind of look at Grimes as maybe he'll get like 15 to 16, $17 million a year. I don't think, I wouldn't go there just yet. We still need to see who else is going to be available, how the market is going to shake out. But keep in mind he's restricted. Restricted free agency has not been kind over the past few years. There's only one team guaranteed to have cap space in the Nets, and I'm not even sure they make a lot of sense for him. So I think the Sixers will be able to keep him. I'd be surprised if they lose him somehow. And I'm not saying he's not worth those valuations that a lot of people are expecting him to get, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes at something lower, just given the market. I'm just not sure there's going to be too much out there. There's just not a lot of money out there. So then the question is, what does it cost to get off Drummond or Gordon if Gordon opts in? But at least Drummond, yeah, last year you brought up the Reggie Jackson dump that cost the Nuggets 3 seconds, which That seemed like an overpay compared to what other players in that salary range cost to get off. It was generally like 1 second round pick. So the market can obviously change. When if there's like if some other team does a salary dump and it costs more, then that just resets the market. But the Sixers do have a lot of second round picks now. They did do that deal with the Wizards where they traded their additional first that they got from the Clippers trade, which it's like the worst between Clippers, Rockets, Thunder. Okay, that's probably going to be like the 29th or 30th overall pick. They're all those teams are pretty good, especially the Thunder. I'm guessing they'll be a top 2 team again next year. So now they got like 4 extra second round picks. So they have the means to do those types of salary dumps later. And yes, and then at that point, if you clear Drummond and Gordon, I think you should be able to bring back Gershon Yabusele and standard attacks. In which case, okay, you complete your roster, you bring back your top guys, and you have another go at it next year, hopefully healthy and with this additional first round pick. I feel like this might be the route, like the most likely route they go for next year.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because everyone has been so miserable following the 2024, 2025 Sixers. And then you ask them what they want the team to do for ahead of 25, 26, and it's bring back Yabusele, bring back Grimes. Most people, I think, would say bring back Oubre and hope that you can add an exciting young player to that mix, and it's going to be an extremely similar team. And that sort of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, is that even still, I mean, like there were some people here who were skeptical about Paul George and have always been skeptical about Daryl Morey in general. But everyone understands what this was supposed to look like, and I just think there's like some understanding that they've had just the most nightmarish season that anybody could have possibly imagined, and it just seems hard to fathom that it could be anything resembling this bad if you try it again. But it is sort of ironic to think, like, with the way the season has gone, that their optimal plan is probably to bring back their 3 best free agents. And then, again, you just cross your fingers about Embiid's availability and, to a lesser extent, George's availability. But I agree with you. And the interesting thing to me with Yabusele, because I think people here is naturally pessimistic sort of group, decided in December or January, when he was playing just terrific basketball night in, night out, was that they're not going to have the capability to keep him. And that, you know, for the fellow salary cap nerds out there like us, that they were going to have to use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception to bring him back, which then hard caps you at the first apron and makes it hard to fit in other pieces around him. But for what it's worth, Yabusele has been like gassed fatigue-wise since like late February. I think he scored in double digits 4 times in his last 14 games, despite averaging 10.5 points a game this season. His value might go down, and he's a good player. But you were early on this. I wrote a story for PhillyVoice.com where I talked to you about Yabusele's free agency, and you were not sold that he was going to be someone that they couldn't keep with the tax mid-level. And that would be significant if they could, because they then don't have to deal with any hard caps when it comes to keeping Grimes, and if they want to keep Oubre, keeping Oubre. I would make an effort to keep Oubre. I'm sort of on the higher end with him at this point. I've just been really impressed with the malleability he's shown in terms of his role from night to night, from week to week or month to month or season to season. He's sort of changed the way that he plays, going downhill, playing off of 2 feet as a driver has made him a much more efficient scorer in the paint and much more reliable decision maker, a little bit more of a playmaker for others. I'm high on Oubre as far as what he can bring to a very good team on a consistent basis. And so, we'll see where it goes. Obviously, everything depends on the price, and I would expect that he'll opt out of that 8.3 million. I think he's wanted a long-term commitment for a long time. Um, he's talked about that before. He said he turned down less money, or more money rather, last summer to come back to the Sixers on a 1+1, to then uh, hopefully prove that he deserves a long-term deal with the Sixers. I think he's done enough to prove that, but everything has to happen within the confines of the salary cap and the construction of the whole roster. Um, so we'll see what happens there. And I'll just mention to your point on Grimes, and we spoke about this a few days ago over text. I've written about this a couple times recently. As you mentioned, Brooklyn right now projects to be the only team with like significant cap space all summer. And as you said, restricted free agency does not, like, it's just a process that inherently favors the teams. And for anything to happen that even makes the Sixers sweat keeping Grimes, it would have to be Brooklyn throwing a huge offer sheet at him if they're really convicted in him. And I suppose that's conceivable, but it also seems unlikely to me. And at that point, the Sixers not only have a chance to keep Grimes, but potentially play hardball with him a little bit. And at that point, you might have an ascending, already very good player on an extremely team-friendly contract.
So it's interesting you bring up the Nets. I was on the Believe in Nets podcast yesterday with Eric Slater. Make sure you guys check out that episode. And we were talking about how I brought up how the Nets early in Sean Marks' tenure, 2016, 2017, he threw out some troll offer sheets to Otto Porter, Tyler Johnson, Alan Crabb. They all got matched. And this is going to be his first time with cap space since then. Well, he had 2019 where he signed Durant and Kyrie, but now there's none of those players are available. He's probably not going to get, the Nets are probably not going to get any like all-star level player or anything like that. But I was thinking, what if they throw out a huge offer sheet at a guy like Jonathan Kuminga, especially if the Warriors make a deep playoff run and he's a big part of that. And knowing that they have some financial, some salary cap issues, keeping Curry and Butler making 55 million plus, and Draymond, maybe there's a annual figure they can give him that would make the Warriors uncomfortable. And so the Nets could do that sort of thing to some other teams. I'm not sure Quentin Grimes is exactly the guy that they should go and about that for, but something that they could potentially do, and this is what Eric brought up, is like, okay, what if they offer some kind of big contract to a guy like Quentin Grimes, but the Sixers want to keep him, and instead they come up with some like other deal where maybe the Sixers trade some of their bad salaries, like Andre Drummond. I don't know about Paul George, how much that would cost, but like, and it's like, okay, so you give us like a couple second round picks with Drummond, and in exchange, we don't give Quentin Grimes this big offer sheet, and, that's settled. So there is that possibility. But then you look at the mid-level exception, it's going to be up to 14 million, which then you are getting to that annual range that many are think Quentin Grimes is worth. So is there a team out there willing to give the full amount, maybe not the full years, but at least get to that full amount? I haven't looked into what teams those may be, especially because I don't know how many of those teams could use the full amount without, while obliging to whatever payroll restrictions they might have, whether it's not passing the tax, aprons, stuff like that. In regards to Yabusele, we did talk about this early on in the year, and I did feel like it was a little overblown. What his valuation is right now. I think though, he's probably above a minimum player for sure. But we saw a lot of players at his level get squeezed to the minimum last year. I don't know if that's going to be the case this year, but maybe it'll be a little better for players like him because the salary cap is going up the full 10% as opposed to 3% last year. Hopefully he can get slightly above the minimum. And then, Oubre, I think so. Oubre, the thing is, when he signed that 1+1, So the expectation is like he joined the Sixers on a minimum last year, and then they gave him the room mid level, which was arguably still below his value. He's probably worth he probably produces more than this amount. But as far as when he signed this deal, there's an expectation then he would opt out. He'd accumulate his early bird rights, and then he could re-sign with the Sixers for what is something a little closer to what his actual value is. And the early bird maximum is something like the mid-level exception, 4 for 60. But now with Quentin Grimes,
I have it at 462 for what it's worth.
Yeah, so it's in that ballpark. So I think at this point, just given that I think Quentin Grimes is clearly the priority, if they have to choose one or the other, I feel like the only way they end up giving him that would be either if they are able to trade a guy like Paul George, or they don't keep their pick. And that will be the next thing. I'll get into that, like some possibilities of like what happens if they don't keep their pick. But it seems like I'm just kind of feeling, just given, again, I brought up this point earlier, you bring in Quentin Grimes, you got all these other two guards you just got that could all be productive players next year. I do question if they even want Kelly Oubre to pick up his player option.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I first of all, I sort of had a similar read on the first part, that I think the main casualty of them keeping the pick would likely be Oubre. And, is there a world where Yabusele takes the tax mid-level and they're not hard capped anywhere, and they really feel convicted in whoever they're getting, plus Grimes, plus Oubre, plus Yabusele on top of Embiid, George, and Maxey, and they go into the tax? It's conceivable. They've gone into the tax before. I don't necessarily think that they view Oubre as a sort of needle mover to that degree that they would probably incur a pretty significant luxury tax bill. It's hard for me to imagine them rooting against him picking up the option at just under 8.4, just because he's a good player and he is worth more. Like, he'll give you more value than $8.4 million. But again, everything has to be talked about within the context of the overall cap sheet, and just in the era of hard caps and aprons and whatnot, whether or not there's an extra, 7, 8, 9, 10, $11 million cap hit from this draft pick is going to be central to all of this. And it's going to be at the center of all of their offseason planning, regardless of who that player is. Like, it's not really about who they draft or what position that guy plays. It's about the salary that they're going to take up on the cap sheet, because it would be easy to see them, and this is not anything that I've heard. It's just my intuition and understanding of how teams operate. After a season like this, incurring a huge luxury tax bill for what is largely the same version of the team that just had one of the most miserable seasons in the history of the franchise, like, doesn't sound at its face like a realistic proposition. So I just say that to say, I agree with you that if they do keep the pick, I think Oubre is most likely to be the sort of collateral damage there.
Right. And as far as the pick, I think we're like the first ones to even bring up, hey, if they keep their pick, that's like actually another unexpected, not unexpected, but like another expense that kind of adds to their challenge of managing this payroll. But it's a good problem to have. Better to keep that pick, incur that big salary, figure it out from there. I think we're pretty much in agreement. There are ways. Ideally, we don't know. Maybe they still feel like Paul George can. They still really high on Paul George and he'll be that guy. But if not him, they've got other players, mid-sized salaries that they can work with. But I want to ask you just like a quick question, and then we could get into like the worst case scenario. But if they keep their pick this year, do you think there is any trade out there worth considering, or is that even not an option to you and they must keep it?
It's a good question. I wrote a story earlier this month basically asking that exact question. Are there any deals that are worth it? And I tried to get creative a little bit. Like, could you come up with, an upcoming extension candidate that might not uh, be extended going into their fourth year that fits better on your team than the team they're currently on. And either you move down, or if the guy's good enough, you just trade the pick for them. The names I came up with, like, if Houston has a rough ending to their season and Jabari Smith Jr. doesn't have a good end to his season, could you move down from 5 to wherever that Phoenix pick lands and get Jabari Smith? I don't know if Houston would do that. Ben Mathurin in Indiana is interesting. I don't know if I would move all the way down from 6 to like the late teens or early 20s for him, because you have to pay him afterwards as well. I think the most likely trade, if they did trade this pick, would just be some sort of traditional trade down, which, like, let's say this pick lands at 6 and you move down to 12 and you pick up a few second round picks, or you pick up some minor asset, like that will save you some noteworthy money just based off of how the rookie scale aligns. I think that's probably the most realistic. You could talk about, do you use this pick to help you get off of Paul George, and maybe instead of trading Paul George for expirings and role players on bad contracts, you could trade Paul George and this pick for another very good player. I don't know who that would actually be is the issue, and it's just hard to trade guys with a $51 million salary. Like, trades of that magnitude are sort of inherently unlikely. But I think it's an interesting question, particularly because this draft, I have yet to fully dive in, but just from looking at big boards and mock drafts and whatnot, it's a lot of guards at the top, particularly in the, we'll call it 3 to 8 region. And that's really the one spot where they're set right now. I think they would take whoever they think is the best player available if they were to stick and pick. But I don't think it's necessarily ideal to use this valuable of a resource at a position where you already have Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, Quentin Grimes is nominally a 2 guard as well. They already have so much invested in the guard position and so much equity there, that maybe you do move down, and maybe in a region of the draft that is populated with more wings, you can move down and the salary cap hit will be lower, and you pick up a few additional assets in the process. I think that's something that's interesting. So these are all sorts of things that they'll have to weigh between May 12th and June 24th, or whenever the draft is, when they find out if they have this pick or not. Is that, everyone just sort of right now is just locked in on, can they keep this pick? Can they pick 1 through 6? They could move down, and I think you can make a compelling case for it. I think a lot of people would gravitate towards, at least people here would gravitate towards, let's see if we can use this to get a mulligan on the Paul George contract. And I just don't know if that's realistic. But I think it's something that's worth thinking about, because I definitely think it's something that they'll think about. And I think when people hear trading the pick, they think cashing it in on a veteran, and the Sixers don't need another older player making a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily need to be that way. And it would be interesting to see sort of how they handle that. Yeah,
and I think, though, if the Sixers keep their pick, and this happens just about every year, if there's a team that either like especially teams as of late that have jumped into the lottery, like Houston last year when they jumped up the top 3, then the first question a lot of people want to ask is like, okay, who can they trade it for? What stars out there that they can do? And that's probably going to be something that a lot of people start speculating on, if there's someone out there that they can trade this pick for. But I would not do that. I would not go for anyone like that. I don't think that's the type of trade I would go for at all. I'm at the point where I think they have to keep their pick. And yes, the only type of sensible deal that kind of makes sense is, let's say they don't get a top 3 pick and they're not totally in love with whoever's there at 4 or 5, and you want to get someone a little lower. Okay, that makes sense. Maybe you can get some additional second draft guys, like you mentioned, Jabari, Benedict Mathurin. That makes sense. And So that's the only way I would see them making that type of like trading their pick at all, which is, you're still in the draft. You're not really trading out of the draft. Back in December, when things started going off the rails, I probably would have speculated, okay, well, if they keep their pick, yeah, they definitely could trade it for a veteran, some type of all-star maybe who could complement this group. But I just think, like, I don't really think that's really a possibility right now. I think especially if you're going to attach that pick to Paul George, I have a hard time seeing what, like, getting an equal all-star back. Like, could you trade that pick with Paul George for like a Lowry Markkanen? I don't know. I don't know that. I don't think that's going to be enough. So, and especially just with the Embiid factor, we don't know what kind of player he's going to be unless he's going to like miraculously get back to MVP form. I feel like they just have to keep the pick or stay, within that lottery range to prepare for any potential pivot out of the Embiid era. Because it seems like they're also, a lot of the moves that they've been making recently is kind of them preparing for maybe some sort of soft rebuild, especially if they keep their pick.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I just think Embiid turned 31 a few days ago. We all know the injury history he has. We all know the history of players that big with that lengthy of an injury history and how they age. We've all seen what's happened this year with him. It would be malpractice to not start thinking about a post Embiid world, which doesn't mean necessarily trading him in part because I don't think that's really viable right now because it would take another team taking on that salary. But just in the sense that you can't put all your eggs in the basket of winning around Embiid when he has not demonstrated in recent years an ability, or this year, I should say, he has not demonstrated an ability to be consistently available. And so that's when you start looking at Maxey, who's 24. You start looking at Jared McCain, who just turned 21. You start looking at Grimes, who's 24. Even Justin Edwards, who just turned 21, undrafted rookie free agent, initially signed to a two-way, who looks like a legitimate rotation wing and has for months and has great feel and is good on both ends of the floor. You start thinking about those pieces. And you also start thinking about, you mentioned at the beginning, those Clippers picks that they got in the James Harden trade. You start thinking about those picks as potentially untouchable because, things are going well for the Clippers right now. They've been one of my favorite teams to watch this season. By 2028, things could go sour there. They don't have a lot of young talent there. They don't have much financial flexibility. They don't control any of their picks between now and then, really. So you have to start thinking about these potential lifelines that help you bridge to the next era of the team. And this pick is the most obvious one, this pick that they are trying to keep within the top 6 this year. And that's really, to me, underscores the importance of every loss that they can pile up between now and April 13th. Because just the difference, you mentioned this earlier, if they finish the season with the 5th worst record in the NBA, they'll have a 64% chance of keeping their pick. If they finish with the 6th worst record, it'll be a 45% chance. If they go down to 7, it's a 32% chance. So those are really significant differences. And if they can get into that 5th spot and have basically a 2 and 3 chance of adding a really valuable young player with upside to their team, it's not just about how they help in 25-26 as they try to get this thing back off the ground. It's about 28-29 and 29-30 in a post-Embiid world and a post-Paul George world where, all of this stuff still has to be weighed by the front office. That you can't focus on a 3-year period or a 5-year period exclusively. It's always about 10 years from now. And that's something that every team has to be cognizant of, particularly a Sixers team that has so much money tied into Embiid without much evidence at this juncture that he's going to be able to pay off that level of investment.
And the other thing they have, like, they're kind of in debt about going forward, not just the money, but draft picks. They still have another first round pick due to the Nets, I believe, in 27 or 28 from acquiring James Harden. And So I think it's a good transition to like my next question, where I want to talk about the draft pick and just the worst case scenario. What happens if they don't keep this pick? Because it's still as good as you probably should feel. Like I'd feel pretty good going into lottery night about the Sixers keeping their pick if they have the fifth worst record. I remember those odds are pretty reminiscent of when the Warriors went into the 2012 lottery. They owed a protected pick. I forgot to who, and they it was like the same type of odds. They bottomed out to try to get the right odds, and it was like something 60 something percent. They ended up keeping it, got the protection they needed, took Harrison Barnes, and maybe the pick got it, maybe the obligation got extinguished after. So if you're a Sixers fan, hoping, trying to get an idea of like what historical comp the situation might be, I think it's that. And if you look at the past, since lottery reform in 2019, I'm looking at the data, teams with let's say the Sixers finish seventh worst, which would not be ideal at all, because seventh, if they get seventh, that means that's going to OKC. The team with the seventh worst record jumped into the top four between 2019 and 2022. So 4 seasons in a row, those odds jumped into the top four. That wasn't the case in the last two, where they stayed put or even dropped down. So there is like, if they do manage to get a little bit out of the top five, there is a precedent recently where they could still keep their pick, which would mean jumping into the top four. But let's say they don't keep it. Let's say the absolute worst case scenario happens. It's seventh, that goes to OKC. Now they have a little more flexibility to manage their payroll. But you could keep Grimes and Yabusele much easier. But that, I think, would be just like a total disaster. If there's any way, do you think this kind of changes their direction of how they might approach the offseason from a lot of the stuff we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, it has to. I mean, first of all, it does. If they don't keep the pick, the biggest beneficiary of that, if he wants to be back, is Oubre, as we were discussing earlier, because that basically the cap slot that could have gone to that pick can instead go to Oubre. It does make it easier to conceive a world where if they do have to go into the non-tax mid-level for Yabusele, which doesn't mean the entirety of it, but just more than what the tax mid-level is worth, which I think is like 5.7 or something this year, starting at, it makes it more feasible that you could fit in Yabusele and Oubre and Grimes and stick under the first apron, where you'd be hard capped, and they'd probably go with 14 players to start the year. It's just one idea. It would really be a gut punch to not get this pick. And they would then owe their 2027 first unprotected to Brooklyn from the Harden trade, where they got Harden, as you mentioned. It would really just be the biggest gut punch imaginable in what has been such a hellish season. And they're like just witnessing all of everything that's happened this season up close and understanding what it would mean if the pick landed at 7. It's hard to not feel like it's just going to land at 7 because that's how things happen here. Obviously, there's actual math behind it, but it would just really be a crushing blow to effectively not get any sort of tangible reward for being so bad this season, right? I mean, that's the whole point of the draft system being the way it is in the NBA, is that competitive balance. When a team is bad, it gives them a chance to add premium talent that the better teams don't have a chance to add in the draft. To not have that after all of this, and then you're likely pivoting to just bringing back the same guys. And granted, we never saw Grimes and Embiid play together for more than a game or two at a time. We don't know what it's all going to look like together. But to have that would just be such a crushing blow for the organization, for the fans. Everyone really would be devastated by it. I haven't even, I think, processed just how brutal that would be for a lot of people. Um, but it's a very real possibility. And before the lottery, they're going to be planning. They're going to have two off-season plans going into the day of the lottery, one for keeping the pick and one for not. And I think the one where they don't keep the pick, again, Oubre is probably the main beneficiary of it, who then can just sort of slot into that salary cap space that might have gone to the pick.
Yeah, it's really hard to fathom just. Oh, whoa, what is going on here? What did I just do? It's just hard to fathom what they might end up doing differently. But it does lead me to my last question. And thanks for sticking around through the technical difficulties, the delay. Don't want to keep you here too much longer. But the thing that has been on the back of my mind about all this, with the potential, with the big contracts for Paul George and Embiid and them not playing to the level, we don't even know what Embiid's availability is going to look like. When a team loses a chunk of their competitive window like this, it does bring some of your other best players' future in doubt. And to me, it brings up, what does this mean for Tyrese Maxey? Because if they're really going to be stuck with these big deals, they can't move off them, and they're just going to remain like a lottery team for the foreseeable future, you got to wonder if this means that they might have to do something about him and not waste his prime. But do you have any thoughts about how this could all potentially impact Tyrese Maxey's future?
Yeah, it's the thought has crossed my mind as well. I was intrigued when you told me yesterday that this is something that we might discuss. Because you're right. It's just when you have a star player, the clock is always ticking. First of all, like to some degree, like Maxey is one of the most competitive players I've ever gotten to know or been around. Like everyone knows him for the big smile and friendly to the cameras and everything, but he like genuinely hates losing more than he loves winning. Like people often say that. It's actually true with Maxey. He is despondent after all of these losses. It really weighs on him. He's never lost in his basketball life. He was on a great team in high school. He was on a great team in AAU. He was on a great team in college. He's been on 4 very good to great teams in the NBA. This is his first time experiencing like a real losing season, and it's weighed on him. And I think you mentioned Lauri Markkanen earlier, and it in some ways it's sort of thinking about the future of the Sixers. Could they be in a spot in a few years where teams start poking around on Maxey the way the teams were on Markkanen? Like last summer, Utah had a choice to make of like double down on Markkanen with all of these young players, or sell high on him and get this massive collection of picks on young players, whether that was from Golden State or anyone else. They chose the former. I wouldn't have gone that way. I would have sold high. I don't know what competitive window they have with Markkanen on this contract, given the makeup of the rest of their roster. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because when you talk about this post-Embiid world, I think everyone has assumed just instinctively that Maxey would be spearheading that next era of Sixers basketball. And I think he will, to be clear. I'm not suggesting that I think he would get moved. But it is interesting to think about like the way that Brooklyn trading Mikal Bridges kickstarted a rebuild by getting just a huge collection of picks, and then they flipped some of their other extraneous picks to get control of their own draft back. There is precedent for it, even not that Maxey is quite the same level of player, but Utah trading Donovan Mitchell to Cleveland a handful of years ago and kickstarting a rebuild when they did that with Gobert. And you just back out of a competitive window for a few years and you collect a huge war chest of picks and you move forward with that rebuild. It's interesting to think about. I think it's far too early to like meaningfully speculate about whether or not it's feasible or likely. But I appreciate that you've thought about it, and I've also thought about it. And what I will say is that if they wanted to go that route, they would get a whole lot for him, because he's, first of all, a very good player. He's like a real culture setter. Um, he's still 24, so he's got many good years ahead of him. And most importantly, he has a skill set that sort of lends itself to fitting in with most teams. He's been a point guard for a few years now, but he might be in his optimal role, like sort of splitting those responsibilities with someone else. He had the best efficiency of his career when he played with James Harden, for what it's worth. So I think it's a really interesting conversation. Again, it's probably too soon to have it in any sort of substantive way. Um, but again, these are the sorts of things that like the Sixers and other teams are probably starting to think about. Anytime a situation blows up the way that this seems to be in the midst of blowing up, these are the conversations that emerge around the most coveted guys on the team.
I agree with you that most likely he'll stick around. I think the Sixers ideally want to keep him, and I think they should be able to make it work. I think the biggest fear for me is what if they don't keep their pick, and then the worst case scenario happens where Embiid is maybe just unavailable. Now because then you're maybe you might get pressured to, that might really ramp that kind of decision up, where maybe we do need to start getting some value for a guy like Maxey, and just really try to accelerate this the transition to the next era. But if they keep their pick, I think that changes things a little bit. Not that like Maxey's would ever push out or anything like that, but that he just might feel a little better about the situation, and that hopefully they can get through this transition as like quickly before his prime runs out or anything like that, or his contract runs out. And there's ways that they could still try to fix their cap sheet. My feeling is that if Embiid doesn't have like any huge long-term absence, and there's an idea that that it maybe just needs couple more tweaks, he might be back next year. I would guess that there are still teams out there that would want to take a shot at him. It wouldn't be a great return by any means for the Sixers, but if that can help them save some money, maybe there's also, if the worst case scenario happens where he can't play, then they could eventually apply for injury exclusion, but that basically means that he's done. And then, so it's just that with the lack of flexibility, it seems like they're going to have, I just going to have this in the back of my mind that maybe they do not necessarily shop him, but at least like listen to what's out there. And look, one, they have Jared McCain. Not that makes the decision like a no-brainer or anything like that, but if they were to move on from him, they do already have another guard to look forward to. But then also, there's going to be, I think, like there's always a good amount of all-star movement in the offseason, every transaction cycle. This year, I'm kind of circling lead guards. There could be maybe like Trae Young. I'm keeping an eye on LaMelo Ball becoming available. It could be a pretty strong market there. If Tyrese Maxey is available, I think he'd be by far the most coveted of that group, in which case maybe there's also a good argument, hey, if the Sixers are actually going to entertain this possibility, better to act earlier than later, while he still got 4 years left on a great deal, and there's going to be a lot of bidding for these other great guards. Maybe you can get like a control of another team's draft picks over the next 7 years, plus a couple good young players, kind of like a Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert type haul. But yeah, this is all more like that's more, yeah. I already went pretty deep on the Tyrese Maxey speculation. That's as far as I'll go. I find it very unlikely. I would guess that he's going to stick around, but yeah, this is just something like this is the downside of having when you sign two very questionable to potentially disastrous contracts. It could just accelerate having to move off one of your other just really good players, unfortunately.
Yep, it's a real challenge, and again, I would echo what you said. I don't expect Maxey to be gone at any point. I think he is the most secure, sort of forward-looking cornerstone of the franchise at this point. I would be floored if they looked into moving him soon, though I agree with you that he would fetch them a crazy haul of players and picks and all sorts of assets. But you're right. You have to start asking really tough questions about what you do with your roster and your cap sheet and your timelines when you have, what is it, 3 years and like 150th million tied to Paul George after this year, and then 4 years and 248 tied to Joel Embiid. It's just so much money that they have tied into guys that look like really safe bets to not pay off those investments. And then it makes you wonder about basically everyone else on the roster, because if you have over $100 million worth of two salaries that are not movable, you have to start thinking about what is movable. And obviously Maxey is the best, in terms of trade value, is the most significant asset on this team.
Yeah. But Sixers fans, if you're still listening, let's take things one step at a time. I think we'll get a lot of more clarity.
Please, guys, one step at a time, please.
We'll get a lot more clarity on lottery night. That's approximately 2 months from now. That could be one of the bigger days in Sixers, modern history. There's been a lot of them, but this will be one to monitor. Could really make or break the next few years. But Adam, thank you for being on. I appreciate you taking your time to do this. Anything you got coming up on the pipeline we should be looking forward to?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work that you do that helps me with my work on a daily basis, truly. I know I've told this to you before, but catcheast.com, Third Apron, all of that is stuff that I use daily in my work, truthfully, and it makes everything so much easier for me. But yeah, just you'll see it on my social media, PhillyVoice.com. Everything you could imagine with Sixers, I'm writing about. Games, injury reports, which there are a whole lot of those these days. Free agency, draft, look ahead stuff, salary cap stuff. If you're interested in reading about Quentin Grimes, I've had a few different stories, including one yesterday morning about just why the market on Grimes really plays well to the Sixers' advantage. All sorts of stuff. Embiid, George, everything you need to know. I'm writing about it. So stay tuned.
Yes, Adam has a very strong understanding of the cap. Anything he does cap related, I give his stamp of approval, especially when it comes to the Sixers. They have definitely some of the more nuanced salary cap stuff in recent years. But make sure you guys follow him. You could follow him on Twitter and Blue Sky, and check out his work on PhillyVoice.com. And you guys can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. My name, Yossi Goslin, which is also the name of the channel on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that. Make sure to subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And subscribe to Third Apron, my newsletter. A lot of great salary cap content in there. I get a lot deeper into some of the big questions I've got. And yeah, I'll probably even have some Sixer stuff, depending what ends up happening with them in the lottery. So keep an eye on all that, and I'll probably be back next week to talk about some other up-and-coming lottery teams. Thanks for tuning in.